With that introduction, what is the intention of this paper, or rather, I think it is asking for women around the world to sign this petition, and how widely is this going to be, circulated, and what do we hope is going to come out of it?
Well, essentially, it's a counter narrative to some of the triumphalist responses from within the Muslim community. So some of our fellow Muslims appear determined to excuse the Taliban's past record of abuse and abrogation of the rights of women and children and minorities in the past. Now, the Taliban has kind of come out and said it is different, it's matured, etc. However, we draw attention firstly to the dangerous erasure of the lived experiences of women and minorities in Afghanistan in the past, and are also expressing caution at this absence of a public narrative for restorative justice. We're a bit disturbed by, people saying, well, if the Americans are gone and now it's an Islamic state, then we should be with the Taliban. We're like, really, we're really happy that the invasion and the occupation is over. It was illegal in the first place. But it doesn't mean we cannot hold the Taliban to account and cannot be critical of them if they abuse the rights of women again, if they abuse the rights of minorities again, because we believe that, on the one hand, it was really wrong for the Americans to use Islamophobic and alarmist narratives that reproduce very, very tired tropes suggesting that all Muslim women everywhere in the world are oppressed and require saviors. Of course, we believe that our beautiful deen liberated us centuries ago. On the other hand, given the Taliban's history in Afghanistan, we're concerned because we also feel very strongly that the version of so-called Islamic law, Sharia law, that they have used in the past is a very warped and patriarchal one, that essentially plays into misogynistic stereotypes, cultural stereotypes, and that is not congruent with true Islam. We believe it is not congruent with the prophetic example. Certainly, it was not the method in which our beloved Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam interacted with women. It was not the way he interacted with minorities. He said very clearly, the Quran says very clearly, there is no collusion in religion.
Absolutely. Western media are truly highlighting a couple of recent atrocities or mishandling or mismanagement of certain situations in Afghanistan. How do you respond to that? And then also talk to us about the masses of people, possibly middle-class educated people, that are wanting to flee Afghanistan. It's really a brain drain that is currently happening there. How do you see this all panning out?
Well, outside of the urban centers, firstly, most Afghans are not well educated. However, as you say, there is a fairly educated middle class, a narrow band that are trying to flee Afghanistan. And yes, it will result in a brain drain. The Taliban have clearly said that they want Afghans to remain in Afghanistan, that they would like people to come back from the diaspora. However, parallel with that narrative, and even in the past few days, and certainly the last month or two, there have been reports of similar kinds of abuses of women and of minorities, especially the Hazaras, the so-called Hazaras in Afghanistan. So it's quite easy to see why people are afraid and concerned. If women around the world are concerned, then, Afghans themselves are obviously much more concerned, or many of them are. And again, we strongly believe that, the record thus far, and it's not just, I must actually say to you, Julie, it is not just from Western media. We have within this collective sources on the ground in Afghanistan, including two women who in the past week have been taken off the national broadcaster just because they're women. Okay. We've also got verified accounts of journalists being harassed one male journalist being kidnapped, another one being shot and killed. So freedom of the media is not congruent with, with the type of rights we espouse. We believe it's not congruent with Islam, and these are worrying signs. There are also reports, these have not been verified, of forced marriages of children as young as 12 years old. Now, again, if those are true, this is of enormous concern. I urge your listeners to think about this. Would you be comfortable in a situation where soldiers came into your home and took your young daughter, teenage daughter, perhaps as young as 12, and said, she has to get married to one of us?
Okay. On the 17th of August, during the press conference held by the Taliban, at the time, it was very encouraging, particularly encouraging to note the emphasis, a huge emphasis on unity and general amnesty. That was the 17th of August. On the 19th of August, from out of Washington, D.C., obviously, the American government very concerned about the Taliban's actions. They put out a press statement stating that the Taliban must immediately cease harassing and attacking journalists for their work, to allow women journalists to broadcast the news and permit the media to operate freely and independently. That was a statement by the Committee to Protect Journalists, Global Journalism. So two almost conflicting stories here. What do you make of that?
Look, I think that at the leadership level, at the upper echelons of leadership, the Taliban have spoken with their allies, countries such as Qatar, Pakistan, China, Russia, etc., and have been told, you need to be different in order to gain international acceptance. If you want to rule this country in a manner that you didn't rule before, then yes, you can work within a framework of Islamic law, but rights have to be accepted. So I think at the upper echelons of the Taliban, that message has permeated. However, the rank and file soldiers, from the reports we are getting, maybe perhaps all of them have not had this message permeate, filter through, and thus we are seeing some abuses. However, I'm not saying this in defense of the Taliban. I'm not saying it's acceptable. I'm saying we need to hold them to account. We know what their past has been. We hope the future will be different. They are in control of the country at the moment. But we cannot stand by idly and allow these kinds of abuses to go on. As I said, television reporter Nimatullah Himmat was kidnapped. Another TV station manager is fighting for his life after having been attacked. That's a private television station. There are rumors of death lists and people being targeted as a result of those lists. So there is a lot of fear on the ground, and it's time that the Taliban really got that message out to their rank and file and said, no, this is not happening. There was an instance on Monday last week where girls went to their college in the city of Herat and were turned away, told to go home. In another city, women bankers went to work and were turned away. And as I said, several female reporters have been taken off air, including two at the national broadcaster, one with whom we actually have contact. So these are not just stories out of Washington. And by the way, the statement from the CPJ has actually been investigated. The CPJ Asia office actually put up that statement. Their spokesperson was the person who had the instances investigated and then came out with it.
Okay, it's not only women journalists that have been harassed or have lost their jobs. I understand that a video reporter, Babrak Amirzada, he owns a private news agency. He's been beaten up as well. So it looks, and also Mahmoud Naimi, a camera operator. It seems that at this point in time, certain factions, we're not saying all of Taliban, but perhaps the important messages are not filtering down to the ground, and it
Mm-hmm.
seems that certain factions or certain people, or maybe people just acting Talibanis, acting very independently, are wanting to muzzle the press.
Mm-hmm. Look, freedom of the media is one of the first things that authoritative regimes clamp down on
Mm,
anywhere in the world, Julie.
mm,
When people want to control the narrative, they want to control the media. But it's also an essential right of well-governed democracies. So it is something the Taliban is going to have to allow. They said they are prepared to allow freedom of the media within an Islamic framework, within Sharia law. But again, it begs the question, whose version of Sharia law? It's really, our hope that any new efforts at framing law, any new legislative efforts will include a substantial number of women, will include legal experts well versed in the law and in framing constitutions and laws, etc., so that universal human rights principles such as freedom of the media, such as women's rights, etc., such as the rights of religious minorities will apply.
Okay, finally, CPJ is also reporting that
Mhm.
a German public broadcaster, Deutsche Welle, that
Yes.
his home was searched. Um,
Mhm.
Apparently, one or two of his family members were killed. However, the reporter has escaped. He's gone back to his home country. What do you know about that?
Yes, several Deutsche Welle members' homes actually were searched, and some of their, journalistic materials, including audio recordings, cameras, etc., were taken away. That's the news we have again from the ground, and that's the news that Deutsche Welle themselves have put out. Um, Most of their reporters, their foreign reporters, have now been evacuated from the country. However, there are still very, very worrying reports that translators and media people who worked with Deutsche Welle and other foreign agencies are being targeted. As I mentioned earlier, there are rumors of death lists, and some of those lists have actually been sent, taken pictures taken of them and being sent out to media agencies in the West. Of course, many of them have not been circulated because it is very difficult to verify whether they are indeed deathless. But the situation is one that is certainly anxiety producing for anybody working in the media, their families, but ought to be anxiety producing for the rest of us as well. Because if there isn't an independent media, then we are not going to have any way of verifying what is happening in Afghanistan. We're not going to have any independent information and news coming out from there. And that, again, is not congruent with Islam. It's not congruent with the prophetic example or the examples that came after.
Absolutely. And Aisha, we have tried to get a Taliban spokesperson to give us their view on all of these allegations, but unfortunately, we're just not getting through to them.
Right.
Inshallah, later in the week, if we are able to connect up with them, we'll hold them to account and see how they move forward on this issue. Shukran very much for your thoughts on this matter. Always a pleasure talking to you. Till the next time, as always, Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Shukran jazilan. And I hope that, the female journalist we're in touch with, perhaps you might be able to talk to her as well.
We're trying to get her for tomorrow, inshallah.
Inshallah, that will be great.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
That was Ayesha Kajee, independent political analyst based right here in Johannesburg, talking to us about the issue around harassment of the media by the Taliban. 8:37 exactly.